Okay, I think we can start. Good afternoon and good morning for some people. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on nature-based solutions as catalyzer for climate adaptation. We are very happy to host this event to mark the launch of the latest Adaptation Insight publication from the Global Center on Adaptation, Investing in Nature. I'm Cedric Malaval, Senior Specialist at the Global Center on Adaptation. And today we will have the opportunity to hear from our excellent guest speakers named Adel Cadario, Program Lead at the Global Center on Adaptation, Dorothy Maseke, Head of the African Natural Capital Alliance and Lead of Nature Finance at FSD Africa. We'll hear also from Sabina Carluccio, Executive Director at the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, ICSI, and Cathy Member, Senior Program Manager at ICSI. First, a quick technical information for you. The commenting function of the webinar is turned off. However, the Q&A function is open and you are welcome to submit the question you may have. Throughout the session, the questions will be answered after the presentations in a dedicated moment. So with our Adaptation Insight publication on investing in nature, we wanted to address a very practical question. How do we scale investment in nature-based solutions, in particular for climate adaptation? And just as importantly, what challenges do we face? And how do we overcome them with pathway to actions? We know that nature-based solutions such as regenerative agriculture, sustainable forestry, or mangrove restoration play a critical role in strengthening climate resilience. They reduce risks, support livelihoods, and deliver strong social and economic benefits. However, investment in these solutions remains far below what is needed. NbS projects are often highly context-specific. They can be perceived as small-scale or high-risk, and many of the benefits they generate, like avoided losses, ecosystem services, or social outcomes, are difficult to quantify in financial terms. As a result, attracting capital, especially private capital, remains a challenge. The good news is that there are solutions. Through strategic use of public finance, strong pipeline of investment projects, or through development of better measurement and standardization of adaptation benefits. With the African Adaptation Acceleration Program developed with the African Development Bank, the GCA has supported a wide range of investment projects across infrastructure, food systems, or urban development, helping assessing climate risk, prioritization of adaptation solutions, or de-risking portfolio of investment projects. This work has generated strong quantitative evidence to support NbS as adaptation solutions. Today's discussion will explore the challenges and opportunity to invest in NbS from various perspectives: adaptation outcomes, sectorial experience, finance, with our guest speakers. Let me now pass it to the first one, Adel Cadario, Program Lead at the Global Center on Adaptation. We'll start by focusing on the needs and solutions to mobilize finance for nature-based solutions. Adel, over to you.
Thank you, Cedric. And good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to present to you today this launch of the Adaptation Insights and to share a bit more about GCA approach to nature-based solution at scale for adaptation and resilience, and what we can see working with partners in terms of good practice that happened. My name is Adel Cadario. I'm leading the program on infrastructure nature-based solution and engaging more and more with the private sector to support mainstreaming adaptation at scale in different levels of investment and investment streams. I wanted to start with the big picture. Why are we discussing nature investing now? Why does it matter to scale investment in nature? And I want to start with the point that it's not out of a green agenda necessarily, or at least not only a green agenda. I was not surprised, but it struck me yesterday that the 3 perceived global risks in the WEF, World Economic Forum Global Risk Report that was published yesterday, ranked as top 3 global threats to the global economy. Number 1, extreme weather events. Number 2, biodiversity loss. Number 3, ecosystem collapse. That was published yesterday, and that's based on the survey of risk perception and global risk perception by stakeholders. And that's what we're discussing about. When we talk about investing in nature, this is like as a matter of financial stability and macroeconomic resilience. We do know that nature and nature-based solutions provide an integrated results and solutions with delivering impact for climate change mitigation, for climate adaptation, and for biodiversity conservation, which are 3 main challenges that are rising and that will impact the economic sectors and financial sectors in the coming decades, if not already. With that in mind, I have 2 key questions that I'm keen to discuss also with you and that we have tried to explore through this new Adaptation Insights series. First, when it comes to investing in nature and more broadly to investing in adaptation, which is our key focus at the Global Center on Adaptation. The first question is, can we act as rational entities? We do know that there is a strong financial and socioeconomic rationale to scale investments in nature-based solutions. It's been experienced, demonstrated case by case. It's being picked up at the project level by different stakeholders. We do see results in tackling climate change issues and fostering sustainable development goals. However, we have a large and persistent investment gap for adaptation. We need at least times 3 or 4 increase in the investment focused on nature. And you see on the right side a study done by the GCA in collaboration with the University of Oxford that showcased the current level of investment in nature and what would be needed in terms of additional financing for nature protection, sustainable land management, and restoration in different types of solutions addressing different types of challenge. But for some reason, we know that it would be a good idea. We know that it would deliver integrated benefits at scale. We know that it does have some financial value at the investment level, and that it has very positive externalities for the socioeconomy, for the communities, yet something is not clicking. The second question is, investing in nature, can we mobilize private finance? What we do see within the $200 billion showcase in current investment flow in nature is that public finance flows is still a huge part of that, 165 million. More than 70% of these public finance for NbS goes to biodiversity protection, sustainable agriculture, forestry, and fishing, meaning disconnected from the integrated impact that it may have in terms of climate change adaptation and resilience. And we don't see enough diversity in the tools and flows of finance that go to investing in nature. We cannot go without the private sector to add financing and to add solutions and tools to finance nature from a private perspective and with specific private enablers. To be fair, with those 2 questions, are we rational when we're not investing enough in nature, and does it make sense for the private sector to not jump in nature investments? We do see some hard to tackle structural barriers from the global financial system, lack of capacity, tools, incentives built in laws and norms, the portfolio of fund managers' perspective, who may lack some standardization structures to really account for proper risks management system, risk assessments, and the valuation of the benefits of nature-based solution at scale with clear information and harmonized information on returns and impact. And last, at the project level, we still see that the project ideation due diligence brings a lot of challenges from high project level risks that are usually seen in such investments, and some market failures for benefits monetarization that doesn't allow the financiers to capture the proper benefits and the wide range of benefits that investing in nature can provide. So we have the strong incentives and we have this need to rationalize investing in nature, to scale finance that goes to nature. We have the needs to find the right tools to engage with the private sectors on those topics. And we know that there are adaptation investment opportunities that exist. The IFC studies itself shows that identify roughly $100 billion in climate change adaptation opportunities for the private sector by 2040. And if these adaptation opportunities are real, like there are some incentives and some legal framework that need to change or to be fostered or understood differently to really make finance flow towards resilient agriculture, water security, infrastructure resilient solutions, ecosystem-based adaptation, and you'll see other examples that really generate adaptation and resilience outcome at scale. What we do within this broader context at GCA, and I'm trying to move my light, is that we're trying to make this climate risk data financially relevant. We're trying to move project after project, working with financial institutions, essentially multilateral development banks in roughly 35 countries to date on the African continent. We want to look with these banks, multilateral development banks, with the government counterparts, at the climate risks in a way that makes sense from an investment perspective. So we combine a technical assistance to do climate risk assessment, multidimensional cost-benefit analysis, to lead to a financing rationale, to have the investment cost and then add up the different co-benefits that can come with investing in nature, to consider how this investment in nature provides high benefits to cost, how to select and prioritize this solution when they are identified as part of larger investment projects. We do that with the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, as I mentioned, in close to 35 countries to date in Africa. And we do see that large-scale infrastructure can be a relevant entry point to consider nature and nature-based solutions as one of the set of solutions that can foster infrastructure resilience, mitigate floods, mitigate extreme temperature risks to the infrastructure assets, to the infrastructure services, and therefore that creates some room to value and to create a benefit assessment of the avoided damages to the assets that come with investing in nature. We see that in Mauritania with a very close look on how community and community involvement can secure the co-benefits of nature-based solutions to be factored in this revenue model and benefits assessment model. We see that for railway developments in Uganda, in Tanzania, where we see that large water level forestry initiative can reduce peak floods and or flood risk over the asset's lifetime, therefore with direct benefits to the railway operations and services. But oftentimes this is not enough. And we want also to connect this investment in nature with the broader co-benefits and to understand the multiple dimensions of the co-benefits of investing in nature at scale. And so from this experience and demonstration, case-by-case demonstration at the project level, this idea of making climate risk assessments and data financially relevant, we are trying to push that now at the national and regional level. And the case that we want to make and that we are exploring in this discussion today is a global initiative to mainstream nature-based solution and nature investments into investment pipeline at a greater scale. If you start to look together at the avoided damages to infrastructure system as maybe one relevant entry point, because infrastructure systems are costly and we can see avoided damage there. But then how to attract more capital and more investors when you start looking at the biodiversity co-benefits, the carbon co-benefits of investing in nature, and you start to look at different type of instruments and sources of finance that can fit and be suitable for specific benefits of the nature-based investments with a very much systems perspective. So with that in mind, we're trying to understand the value at scale of investing in nature to attract the finance at a larger scale for that, with this suite of analytics and tools that has been developed with the University of Oxford, the ICSI group. And we want that to be connected to finance and financing flows. And so there is a need here that we see and that we want to develop and discuss with you for practical guidance, tools, and peer learning to accelerate implementation with harmonized metrics. To allow for implementation and harmonization across stakeholders and at scale. And what we see also through our engagement in different countries with different financial institutions is a strong momentum and appetite to work together to scale nature investments. It does require to break through some barriers and to allow ourselves to have this integrated benefits assessment of investing in nature. And that's something that we want to discuss today. The key opportunity that we had and why we are convening this discussion and presentations is with the launch of this Adaptation Insights, where we are trying to learn through the set of projects that we have developed on infrastructure resilience and valuing, promoting financing in nature-based solutions on different projects and at scale in countries. We want to confront that with academic knowledge, innovative data analysis, and to combine it, to present it, and to make it available with a discussion on what can be the key action points to foster investing in nature at scale. And hopefully you will see this report that is published online, where we discuss how public finance can actually crowd in private capitals through different investments and incentivization mechanism that can foster blended finance structures specifically. We want to understand how this data, the climate risk, can be relevant to build investors' confidence and how to develop standardized set of metrics for cross-cutting benefits evaluation, which is a key topic to align and incentivize and report on impact when it comes to investing in nature. And we want to use our case level studies to unpack what are the benefits to cost ratios and how high can it get with a view on the impact, with a view on the co-benefits for the communities, and to have this integrated impact-oriented investment prioritization for nature. You would discover more in the report and presentation. I hope this opens up a bit the discussion with a few questions that we want to investigate further. And with that, I'm very pleased to leave the floor to Dorothy Masake, Lead Nature Finance at FSD Africa, who will explain from a practitioner perspective what is already happening in the ground, because there are a lot of public and private initiatives already. So we wanted together to showcase some actual cases and good practices that are emerging to make the discussion as tangible as possible. Dorothy, thank you a lot, and over to you. Thanks.
Great. Let me unmute. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much for that presentation. And I'll just go ahead and share my screen. I'll briefly speak about just a minute. I put it on share. I hope you can see it. Is it visible? Great, I can see some nods. So that was a very good presentation, Adele. And it's so amazing to see so many people on the call. And that is quite encouraging, but also gives a lot of pressure. So I am going to speak about the little experience that we have had and the engagements that we have had when it comes to attempting to scale NbS for climate adaptation and financial resilience. I'll talk about very briefly of the work that we are doing through the African Natural Capital Alliance, and you can see that on your screen. ANCA, as we fondly call it, is a multi-stakeholder forum that is hosted by FSD Africa. And FSD Africa, just very quickly, is a specialist development agency funded by the UK government. And our role at FSD is to make financial systems work for Africa's future. And so ANCA was formed about 3 years ago in response to a clear gap. And that gap at that time was the absence of a platform, a continental platform that connects finance and nature from a scientific perspective. Today, I'm proud to say we have grown into more than 130 member institutions, bringing together total net assets of more than £1 trillion. But also more importantly is to say that we've not just grown domestically, and that has been our big focus and a big aspect that we have been driving, but we're increasingly seeing international investors joining the network in a bid to see or seek opportunities from Africa. And so that way then we are seeing a situation where we are not just growing the private domestic capital and making it available, but also providing opportunities for international investors. And these investors are very key because we need them to scale some of the finance or some of the projects that we are looking for. We take a systems level approach to scaling NbS. And so we look at it in 4 components. And most of my slides you'll see, or my presentation, or the example that we have, the deep dive that I'll cover, takes more or less the same shape. And so we are looking at a systems level approach for addressing the persistent lack of financing that, Cedric, you rightfully talked about, and the opportunities that Adele, you've spoken about. And this is in regards to policy and regulation, where we are working with central banks, we're working with supervisors across the continent, we're working with ministries to build that much needed enabling environment. Capacity building is also so important. And many of you on the call are already converted. So you possibly fully understand why nature, why climate, why investment is important, why NbS is important. But many a time, and I believe Adele, as you've been engaging with financial institutions, when you go to speak to a chief investment officer who is going to be putting a business case or a concept for approval at the investment committee, many of them do not fully understand the aspect of nature. Climate, a lot has been done. Thankfully, a lot has been, researched, and there's a lot of data. There are a number of proven cases, but nature still has a bit of a challenge. And you'll be surprised that sometimes when we engage financial institutions, we start with what we call fundamentals of nature. And we go into reminding them of, elementary school, and we remind them of what nature represents, what it is, living things, plants, animals. Then you talk of biomes and realms, and you get to, speak of the atmosphere, oceans, land, fresh water. It goes into this understanding that many of us, and I, for example, having been in the financial services industry until very recently, had forgotten or did not have at the top of my mind when it comes to finance. So capacity is a big one. Data and metrics is very big. It's a big focus area for us, largely driven by the challenges that we have seen and the need to improve access to reliable, decision useful data, to track impacts, to track dependencies is also a big piece on NbS. Why? Because most of the time you go to an investment committee, if there's no track record, if the returns are not clear, if the risk profile is not clear, they will not budge. And so that's why the data and metrics piece is very important. And then the last piece is investment catalyzation. It's one thing to work on policy, ecosystem development that each and every one of us here is possibly has been working aggressively on. It's one thing to build capacity. It's one thing to get the data to a point that can be, useful and decision relevant. But all these things will not add value if there's no pipeline. And so the aspect of accelerating pipeline, unlocking the blended finance mechanisms that make NbS investments bankable is also an area and a key lesson that has really informed a big part of our work. And so on this screen are some examples of nature-based solutions that we are seeing are increasingly gaining momentum across the continent. Now, some of you may have even deeper knowledge and deeper information because some of you may have worked on some of this. And while we recognize that there are still several challenges that need to be addressed when you look at, say, the projects that you have on your screen, at least it does show that the momentum is growing. One thing that comes out clearly when we look at most of the examples, and Adele, you rightfully put it, is that most of them are driven or are publicly funded, or you'll see the leading agencies or the leading organizations are actually governments or public institutions. And so there's indeed a need to actually now, as you said very well, is to find ways within which blended finance can come in, and more importantly, the private sector can begin to take a lead in some of this. The examples on your screen are quite illustrative, but in a minute or two, I'm going to deep dive into one particular one that we are actually working on, and that I would really like to interest you, at least in terms of just getting to understand some of the challenges that we are seeing. But very quickly, the DRC project, the Bashamba Tishaka Road improvement project that you have on your screen, there for restoration of grasslands and forests. Work is being done in Tanzania. We've seen Tanzania is actually a very, very big market. One of the things that we've seen, and my colleague who deals with carbon, we've seen quite a bit of interest on carbon markets in Tanzania. And the other thing that you're also seeing is the role and the interest and the support by government in establishing those very good policy environments or enabling environments to enable transactions or development of such instruments such as carbon markets, etc. Madagascar, of course, WWF has done a lot of work in Madagascar. Kenya, where I come from, a lot is ongoing. We have very many projects, especially when you look at projects that are community-led, community-driven projects. Quite a number of carbon projects in Kenya also. And of course, in West Africa. Now, we have a big gap in the Northern African region. And I guess I want to mention that it's not intentional, but for us, what most of the projects that we have seen, the projects that are coming through to our pipeline are largely East and Central African, Southern African, and quite a bit in the Western African region. But I want to deep dive or focus on one that we are aggressively pursuing. And it touches almost on one of the aspects, Adele, you mentioned about regenerative agriculture. And so this is on advancing regenerative land use, and we call it our REGEN program. On this REGEN program, and I'm going to take the next 5 minutes just to cover this in a very high level, is to think of the role of agriculture and forestry and the role that each of these plays in both natural capital resilience and also financial resilience of, resilience of our economies. Agriculture and forestry are the backbone of our economies. 30% of Africa's GDP, agriculture contributes 30% of Africa's GDP, employs 60% of Africa's workforce. 70% of Africans actually depend on forests and woodlands. But when you look at the natural capital aspects, 60% of sub-Saharan African land is already degraded. 45% is threatened by desertification. 15% of crop yield is actually projected to decline by 2050. Now, it goes further when you look at the financial and economic consequences. 20% increase in commodity prices due to water stress. And as you know, 25% of African countries are already facing a water stress. Approximately 3% annual GDP decline from soil erosion and nutrient depletion. So when you look at the natural capital aspects and the economic or financial consequences, surely something needs to be done. And so investing in NbS through REGEN agriculture, and sustainable forestry essentially would deliver the natural and financial resilience that is needed. Again, a few numbers on your screen, but I just want to mention just two. Regenerative systems retain 30 to 50% more water. What does this do? In countries where, of course, there is water stress, you can understand how important that is. From a financial perspective, these systems deliver almost up to 20% higher net margins through yield stability, through lower input costs, etc. Now, when you talk to financial institutions, what would this mean? For them, they're looking at their delinquency rates. Most of these people who've taken loans have at the base of what they do, agriculture plays a key role. And therefore, if you're able to at least lower default risk by a certain percentage, then indeed we will be able to create the much needed value for the continent. And so what are we trying to do through this REGEN program? We are trying to mobilize financing for regenerative transitions through a threefold approach. I told you at the beginning of my slides that the policy work, the capacity building work, the pipeline generation work, the data work, that cuts across most of what we do. And so in that exact manner, you can see on your screen, we want to mobilize local and regional finance for Africa's transition to region agriculture and sustainable forestry, while generating the insights to inform policy, to inform systems change, to inform, of course, replication. And we want to do this, or we are doing this through two components. The capital supply side, where we need to deal with the actual investment risks and product mismatches and the perceived risks, and the capital demand side, where we need to deal with the capacity, the borrower capacity, we need to deal with the policy piece, and of course, policy comes with data. And so on the capital supply side, and I've talked about the challenges that the challenges that Africa is facing and the opportunities from a nature and from an agriculture perspective. But now we are going back to the financial institutions that we work with, that are part of the membership that we have been engaging with, who tell you that, one, they do not understand how to assess agriculture or region ag kind of, programs or projects. Two, you look at the loan tenure that exists because these have been underwritten, these have been priced. The loan tenure does not enable the support or enable support for such initiatives. You look at the grace periods that they have, you look at the policy aspects. And so we are trying to address all these issues through this particular program. So we are looking at an on-lending facility, and I want to say this is not the first one. There are many, as we've been trying to develop this, we've seen there are a number of such funds that are already in the market. But what we are trying to do is to make this also as driven by the market as possible, speaking to financial institutions on what exactly their challenges are, but also speaking to these opportunities or project developers or farmers on what the challenges are. And so the on-lending facility, one that provides concessional finance to local financial institutions and non-banking financial institutions for on-lending to region ag and sustainable forestry enterprises that enables 10-year extension and enables flexible collateral, grace period, lower pricing, etc., to deal with the actual investment risks and the product mismatch is one thing. And then TA is still very critical. Like I said, starting with supporting them in assessing, in underwriting, in MRV. I mean, many times we speak of MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification, and you know, think of carbon projects or, the emerging biodiversity projects. But this is a critical component, even for this particular, piece. And then on the capital demand side, strengthening the pipelines that I talked about, still through TA, both pre and post investment. And then on the policy, data and scaling, capturing and synthesizing insights from all this to inform policy development, improve data, improve metrics, and support replication. And so we hope that through this, we'll be able to tackle all these barriers. So what are we saying? There is, and we are happy to provide more details on this, but we want to see, and based on the work that we're doing in the market, based on what we are hearing from our members who are both financial institutions, who are also project developers and project implementers, we want to build this partnership and work with them into developing, this facility that will enable the scaling of finance for region ag and sustainable forestry. So inviting anyone who'd want more details for this, and happy to take any questions. I hope I've not taken too much time, but happy to hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Katie Monborough. I'm the Senior Programme Manager at the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, or ICSI for short. I'm joined by ICSI's Executive Director, Savina Carliccio. In this next segment, we'll be discussing this topic from the perspective of the technical community. So we'll be making some reflections on the presentations that we've just heard. And following our short discussion, we'll then move on to the Q&A segment of this event. So please do keep adding your questions for your speakers into the Q&A chat box, and we'll pick those up shortly. We've seen some great questions coming in, so thank you all. So Sabina, welcome. So through ICSI, my first question is about how you represent the technical community, so engineers, planners, designers. These are people who will need to actually implement nature-based solutions in infrastructure. So I'm curious to know about your reflections on the presentations that we've heard so far.
Thank you, Katie, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to be the technical community representative in a discussion that is so interesting on nature-based solution. I think it does speak to the fact that engineers, planners, designers, and everyone who's involved in implementation actually needs to be involved quite early on in the discussion, and then provide their value through many different ways that I can touch upon. Maybe just to start with reflection on all the presentation from Adele and Dorothy. I think for me, I love the fact that Adele started with the biodiversity loss, nature crisis. I mean, this is not nice to have. This is not something that we just do to put a little bit of greenwashing. You know, this is we are in an emergency, and we really need to deal with this urgently. We don't have another option. And linked to this, something that Dorothy said also struck a chord in me is sometimes you need to start from the basics. It's like our relationship with nature, the fact that we are part of nature, we're so dependent on it. And so if nature is in trouble, we are also in trouble. And this is something that escapes people for some reason. We just don't think about this. So I think that is like perfect framing for me. And then I also love the fact that the two questions that Adele posed at the start is like, why aren't we being rational? And then why and how can we make it more compelling for the private sector? Because those are two key things. So and I think from my perspective, from the perspective of the technical people, the engineers, I mean, that's what we do. We want to be rational. We want to provide that sort of credibility, that reassurance, that evidence, that sort of risk assessment. I suppose that then convinces the investors, that unlocks more finance. So that's something that for me kind of like also struck me. And then finally, before I go into my own perspective, is that the fact that the large scale infrastructure provides entry point for nature-based solution. This is super important because 75% of the infrastructure it will exist in 2050 has not been built. So that means there is a massive opportunity to include nature-based solutions and to invest in nature so that it becomes part of that infrastructure that will be developed, particularly in the African continent, where the kind of the infrastructure development will be obviously, much infrastructure will be developed. So, but to scale this up, we need to be convincing, multiple stakeholders, right? We need to be convincing the investors. We need to convince the policymakers. We need to convince the implementers, and all of these communities need to be convinced in a slightly different way. I think that's kind of the other thing. And so let me just maybe take it to the benefits and kind of monetization of benefits standpoint, because I think this is the crux of the discussion. So Adele talked about the private capital and the private investment being so much of a smaller proportion of the public investment, which is also not enough. But anyway, so let's crowd in that private investment. But then the way the private investors and the public stakeholders see they're asking different questions. So they have a very different view of the NbS investment. So the private investors are asking, Where are the predictable, monetizable returns, and focus on metrics that can be quantified. And they're less keen to invest on NbSs that are less easy to monetize, also considering that they are looking at shorter investment cycles. Whereas the public investors, they can prioritize on that system level, public value, the intergenerational benefits, the co-benefits, right? I'm sure, in the chat, I know there was some discussion on co-benefits. So where can the technical community help? I think the technical community can, through technical assistance upstream, it is fundamental, I think, that the technical specialists, particularly the engineers that I'm representing in this moment, in this discussion, are involved at that early stage. And this is actually to design the investment in a way that can be implemented, and then choosing the solutions, but also identifying the metrics that can be measured during the life cycle of the project, providing that evidence that then needs to fed back into the investment case of other projects.
Okay, thank you. That's an excellent follow-on from what Dorothy was saying around that enabling conditions, needing that capacity building, that data and metrics, and how that technical community can now come in and help. And do we have the knowledge and skills that are needed in the technical community and wider to actually implement NbS at the scale it's needed?
I think so. I guess the answer is engineers are not traditionally trained to actually implement solutions that include nature. I mean, this is kind of the traditional engineering education does not really prepare engineers for this. I mean, obviously, with the NbS gaining momentum, and then the fact that now it's almost like we have no other choice that actually include, nature in our thinking, and not only just integrate it in an extractive way, extracting ecosystem services, but also to just protect nature, regenerate nature if we can through the infrastructure development. That doesn't need to be necessarily at odds. So I guess, what engineers can do quite well, they can quantify performance, they can convert those ecosystem services such as flood attenuation, heat reduction, or water filtration that can be provided by nature-based solutions, particularly when they're integrated into an infrastructure, into something measurable, comparable. It can be turned into something that is a performance metric that then for example, an environmental impact bond or another investment mechanism can use to track the performance of the nature-based solution. This is very important. Engineers are good at doing risk modeling and quantifying risk, and so they can actually help in that respect. Engineers are also, I think, it's quite important to consider that when we talk about nature-based solutions, obviously we're looking at a spectrum, right? We are looking at pure natural solution, blue-green, but we're also looking at different variation of gray infrastructure that is hybrid, including natural solutions. And those, I think, hybrid infrastructure, green-gray, blue, green-gray, and different permutation, I think that that's where I see the greatest potential in actually scale up investment and include that type of hybrid solution into infrastructure development going forward, because the gray element do provide reliability. They can be designed and they can provide protection. For example, if we're talking about infrastructure that is coastal protection, we do need particularly where we need to protect communities, that reliability that can be provided by the great traditional infrastructure. But we also we do need to also consider how the blue-green elements can be added to actually improve and reduce cost of the great traditional infrastructure, as well as increasing ecosystem benefits. So engineers really need to be more, I suppose, in the future, educated into including ecological principles in their thinking and their design thinking, including better understanding of what nature-based solutions that can be included in their designs, in the hierarchy of solutions that they consider. So gray, what comes to mind, because that's what they've always done. But nature-based solutions really need to be rapidly scaling up the hierarchy of solutions that are being considered. But also they need to be convinced, I suppose, that those type of solutions are reliable, they can perform, and this is where standards are useful, and guidance and standards are lacking in this respect. And that's where we really need to, I suppose, also get engineers working with other specialists that have not worked before, ecologists, economists, climate scientists. I stop because I know that we want to get the audience questions as well. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Sabina. Yes, I'd like to use the remaining 15 minutes to bring back Adele and Dorothy and answer some of our audience questions. But I hope we have a little bit more time later to hear a bit more about how and why the technical community should engage with this. Excellent. Hello, Adele, Dorothy, welcome back. So please do, audience members, keep putting questions into the Q&A box. I see we've got a few here. I noticed one for Adele that Adele, you had a look and I know you wrote a short comment on, but I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit more to this now around the successful financial instruments that are working at scale, and how they can sort of leverage finance for NbS for resilient infrastructure. So a few more words on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's going to be a bit difficult to give a very short answer to these complex questions, but I feel I would like hook my answer in two key points that I feel were super to highlight in Dorothy's presentation. And we may not want to look at one size fits all type of instrument and solution for nature investing at scale. And then nature as a community, where we may miss the point of all the integrated benefits of investment in nature. But therefore, I felt 2 points of Dorothy's presentation about having this system level approach and then developing the pipeline at once and accelerating the pipeline development, I feel is a key answer to identify the next question, which is then for this pipeline of solutions that address several co-benefits, what is the best suited instrument? And I feel this matter of integrated approach of benefits can provide the right segue to the type of instrument. And this is where innovation can really happen. So to give you a specific example and not keeping it a bit short, so please find more in the different reports and I'll be happy to continue the discussion. That's very much an ongoing discussion. We as GCA have worked a lot with the World Bank, with the African Development Bank and the government and Tanzania Railway Corporation on Tanzania railway systems. And when you look at railway, you don't necessarily look at investing in nature. But Tanzania's railway network, which is roughly 3,000 kilometers, is highly exposed to climate risk. You have flooding that damages tracks and culverts. You have erosion that undermines the embankment. You have droughts that intensify soil degradation. All of that has a cost in terms of operations maintenance, and it is increased and exacerbated risks from climate change. When you look at this risk in a bit of details, how much does this cost in terms of operation and maintenance, you can start understanding what are the hotspots of risks and what can TRC as a railway company do about it. And what are the cost-efficient solutions? And for the in-flood and erosion-prone sections, nature-based solutions are often found to be lower cost, higher benefits on the long term, with ecosystem and community benefits that may not be of direct interest for TRC, but that may be of interest for co-financers, governmental partners, and political partners, typically. And so what we can do then is to unpack, okay, in this 3,676 kilometers of railway, what is the right of way? How much hectare are suitable for different type of NbS intervention? And we find that you may have a lot of reforestation to plant drought-resilient native trees on slopes. You can have part of these hectares that are suitable for agroforestry, such as buffer farmland with fruit, fodder, nitrogen fixing trees that provide different type of co-benefits. And last, you have wetland restoration that regulate floodplains to slow floodwaters typically. And all of that can be costed in terms of investment, but also in terms of benefits to the railway. And then you can start building on that and understanding, okay, you can have carbon sequestration rate for reforestation, for agroforestry, for wetlands. How much would it be? How many tons of CO2 per hectare per year? What would be the revenue model for TRC to maybe provide access to land for the private sector to invest in certificates and carbon credits, and then to share with a shared revenue model between TRC, communities, the private investors. And you really need, when it comes to investing in nature and finding the right financing mechanism, to sort of embrace complexity. And you need to get there to really understand the benefits and have a fair distribution of benefits that allow for your nature-based solution to ensure resilience for communities on the grounds, on the sites where these investments are being implemented, while securing the impact at scale. And so this model of coupling railway rehabilitation, operation and maintenance, land operations with carbon credits, for example, at scale in Tanzania, does generate some revenue that may not be enough in itself to pay for the whole intervention. But when you add up avoided cost for TRC, carbon revenue for private sector participant and investor, plus community co-benefits in terms of direct benefits from agroforestry initiative, typically, you start to make a case that will be of interest for all partners around the table. And this is how this pipeline as a whole could get through with then a project per project implementation. So I feel that elevating the discussion, not from a compliance and due diligence process to building a network on green infrastructure that support adaptation and resilience at scale, is actually the entry point that we would want to adopt to then think about what is the financing solution to capture all these benefits across the table. I'll stop here, but I hope that provides a good teaser on a way to do and actual practical ways to do that.
That's absolutely. Thank you, Adele. And I can see that some of our panelists are also answering questions in the chat, so you may get a written answer if we don't have time to answer your question out loud. So thanks, Savina. I can see you're doing that now. So there's a question here for whoever wants to come in, but I think, Dorothy, I'll come to you first. And it's the question around challenges. So what are the primary hurdles in quantifying finance in this NbS system?
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just typing, then it's such a long thing to type. I am glad you've given me the chance. So the hurdles are many. One is that nature doesn't necessarily cleanly translate or align itself into financial value. Now, when you're speaking to an investor, then you see that then there's a very weak case for them to come in. These outcomes are also hard to measure. They are sometimes hard to quantify. There are very many models and metrics. In fact, the Nature Positive Initiative, for example, right now is working on a state for nature metrics. Because when you speak to financial institutions, they have almost 600 to 2,000 metrics that are relevant. But now you can imagine if you have 600 metrics to measure, which ones would you pick? Which would be the most relevant anyway for decisions to be made? And so that becomes another challenge. And then because of the lack of data and the challenges on metrics, you see there's also a heavy reliance on proxy data. So the hurdles are quite a number. And what we then need to do at the end of the day is figure out how to deal with the issue of valuation, the issue on data availability, data relevance, the metrics to be used so that you can actually quantify the benefits, quantify in a way and help underwrite, whether it's a bank or a loan product or an insurance product, you need data to underwrite. And so these hurdles need to be overcome. It's not easy, but indeed it can be done because there are cases where it has been done.
And I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that from any other perspective. Savina or Adele.
I was just busy typing on these questions, and thank you for asking us so many questions. I was just not exactly on this one, but I was typing something that is related to the nature positive engineering. Let me just quickly mention this study. This is a global study that we did over the last year, which really looked at exactly this. Like if the engineering profession is so key in shaping the future of infrastructure development, and so therefore they need to be trained. And I touched upon this. And we looked at what nature positive engineering actually means. It doesn't really exist as a term. So we did a global study, a global foresight review. I posted the link. I hope you can take a look. And this is really advocating for the profession to almost like take nature under their wing. As they become like us, they are stewards of the built environment, to become stewards of the natural environment as well. So yeah, please take a look, and we're cooking up, I suppose, integrating this type of knowledge into engineering curricula, as well as continued professional developments for current professionals that I suppose like me need to right now implement this type of solutions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sabina. And thank you all. I've just realised the time, and we've got one minute left of our webinar. So I think that is all the questions we have time for today. And thank you so much for those of you who asked questions. We really appreciate your participation. Before we end, I wanted to make you aware of our next event in the series. So we have another Adaptation Insights webinar, which will be all around climate resilient health systems for sustained value chains, healthcare access and services. So this is ahead of the launch of GCA's upcoming report on climate resilient health systems. And you can register now using a link that we'll add to the chat, but it's also on GCA's LinkedIn page. I think we posted about it yesterday, if you need to go back and find that again. So it's the same time next week, Thursday the 22nd of January at 3 till 4 CET on Zoom again. Thank you all to the speakers. Thank you very much to the audience members. I hope you all have a great day, evening, wherever you are in the world, and hopefully see you next week online.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Goodbye.